Hello and welcome to another episode of Heart Centered Conversations with me, Jayne McDowell. And I'm delighted to introduce to you my guest today, the lovely Hils Crisp. Hils, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, Jane. Thank you so much for having me. So, I am the business alchemist and I'm a position elevation strategist and unique magic activator. So, I help experienced, ambitious online coaches, healers, and therapists who are doing transformational work to really do their soul work, the work that they're here to do, to really believe in themselves and to figure out what their soul aligned niche is and all the messaging and the offers and everything around that so that they can just get out there and do their best work with the most aligned clients and grow their business or achieve whatever goals it is that they want to achieve. Generally, it's growing their business.
Well, that sounds truly magical, Hils. So tell me, what is the book that you have brought along to today's conversation?
It's an old book. It's an old book. So
Oh,
it's called Find Your Power.
mm,
Dr. Chris Johnstone. Johnstone.
yeah,
And I've no idea how I sort of found it or anything like that. And it was funny because when I dug it out, I was
yeah.
like, when did I read this book? Because it's got to be something like 20 years ago, right? So I had a look at like, well, when was it published? And the it was first published in 2006, which I was actually quite surprised about because I
Mm.
thought, I'm sure I read it before then. But there you go, something around
Well, hey, Hills, this is
years.
now 2025, so you're only 1 year out, 20 years
Oh,
ago.
but I kind of thought it was more like 2000, 2001. But anyway, um,
Mm,
yeah, it was probably one of the first self-help books that I read. Um,
right.
Obviously, I've read a lot more since then, but it was the beginning of delving into that stuff, you know. Um, so yeah, I mean it's the only book that seems to have survived. I think I've got a Tony Robbins book from around the same time. Um, And it just, it was one of those books that really opened my eyes to a lot of things, right? Self-help, it's that introspection, that self-awareness, figuring
Yeah,
out what I wanted. I think I was a bit of a transition of like, I'm not happy with what's happening in my life, what's going on, but I don't
yeah,
know what else I want. I was in that sort
yeah,
of place of just like, I know that this isn't it, but I
yeah.
don't know what else it might be.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
so
what
I,
drew you to that book, do you think?
I cannot remember. I think it might have been recommended. I can only
Hmm.
think it's recommended. Um, but yeah, find your power. Who doesn't want to do that, right? When you're like, however old I was, 20, late 20s or something. Um, so yeah, and I think your invitation about being on the podcast was about some a book that changed your life. And I want to read if I may, the little bit that has stayed with me. It's probably the only bit from the whole book that's really
Oh, I'd
stayed.
love that. Yeah.
I'll read the whole paragraph just because it kind of puts it in
Okay.
context. When you're facing a choice of whether or not to do something, it is easy to get stalled by focusing on what can go wrong if you proceed. But what might happen if you don't move forward? Looking at the downside of staying where you are can generate the inspirational dissatisfaction needed to prompt change. Right. So, a bit of context. The bit that really stuck with me is this next bit. A scary fear of any journey is that you might die on the way, metaphorically. But you can also die a little every day if you avoid the adventures you're here to live.
Yes,
That
true.
that was essentially, um, I think how I felt in my life was that it just hit home. I was like, I think I am dying a little bit every day. Like
Yeah.
life that is not aligned, that is not what I want, is not enjoyable, just all those things of just yeah, I just wasn't happy. Spending, 2 hours a day commuting and just thinking, I just like, what is this life that I've, created for myself?
Yeah. And it's a
Really sad.
common thing, isn't it? Because so many people fall into that because we're told you go to school, you go and get some further education in some form or another, and then you go and get a job that pays your bills and keeps you safe. And then you just sit on this hamster wheel and
Where's the
everything
fun? Where's
mediocre.
the
Yeah,
adventure? Where's the alignment? Where's the
yeah,
purpose? you know.
yeah,
And I do think things have moved on, like from my generation, our generation of like purpose was a bit of a luxury or something, it was a bit frivolous, like to follow your purpose,
yeah,
But I think things have changed in the last, since we were kids, let's say, that I think a lot more parents, I think it's talked about more in the mainstream, and I think a lot more parents are bringing that in to their for their children and being like,
yeah,
follow what you love, like follow what you enjoy. Just don't worry about the rest, don't worry about the rest. Um, at a certain point, I mean, yeah, obviously we've got to pay the bills and everything, but it really is so much more important because I think
yeah,
do that, the rest probably follows.
yeah,
We,
yeah. Because I think we're conditioned to stay in scarcity,
mm,
stay in fear, so
mm,
that we can, as a society, we can carry on the way it is at the moment. So, you know,
oh,
people
good
at the
little
very
hip-hop.
top
Yeah. Yeah.
life is peachy for them, and for those underneath is kind of like, meh.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
yeah, we're the machine, right? We're the
yeah,
robots that, and they don't want us to be free thinking, following our purpose and our joy and all of that, because then we're not being productive. And of
mm,
course, the Western world, particularly the men's and the patriarchal Western world, it's all about productivity
yeah,
and economic growth, right? I mean, not to go
yeah.
into economics, but it's all about growth, and we don't, where's the happiness in that? It's all about.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? The word growth, because when I hear the word growth, I think of that as a positive thing. But as you say, when it's put in a sort of more
Yeah,
economic context, it's about the growth of the economy, which, yes, it will at some level benefit most people, but at the same time, it keeps people stuck.
yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So
I know growth. Yeah, it's an interesting word because I agree. For me, growth is positive, definitely. I think it is. It is for most people, but it's not always easy. And there's different measures of growth and different,
yeah,
yeah, different things, different ways to grow, isn't there? You
yeah,
grow bigger physically, but that's not a
yeah,
good thing, right? So is that? I mean,
yeah,
it's all different, isn't it? Obviously, we're both
yeah.
in the personal growth world a lot, and yeah, absolutely, that personal growth is really valuable, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's fascinating that because just thinking about what you were saying, that you think that things have changed a lot and people are more open to talking about their purpose, etc. And I'm just wondering whether that's because I know similar to me, you surround yourself with people who are on a personal growth journey. And and I wonder whether for still most of the population, it's go to work, go to the pub, watch Netflix, go to sleep. There's nothing wrong with that. It's
It's
just
yeah,
whether that's really fulfilling you, or if
yeah,
it's escape. It's a form of escapism from the drudgery that you feel every day when you go to your kind of
yeah.
mundane job.
I think there's still a big mixture. I think the more intelligent, more affluent people, I think, are more tuned into fulfillment, purpose, how they feel, and they don't just want the drudgery, they don't just want the same old, same old. But I do think like, and one of my brothers is like this, bless him, he's, you know, well, I don't know how to say it in a not derogatory way. He has a bit of manual work. He's not massively bright. He is that drudgery of just like, as long as he's happy, as long as he's got a job and somewhere safe and warm to sleep, like he's got his home and he's got his TV and his computer games, and it's kind of like he's okay, and to talk to him about purpose, I think it would go straight over his head. But I think for maybe the more educated people, it feels more mainstream. Like I'm a Radio 2 listener. I used to be Radio 1, but I'm a bit too old
Pretty
now.
mainstream radio too. It's the most
Yeah,
popular radio
well,
station in the country.
it is. It is mainstream. And they talk about meditation, they do talk about these things. And I do think a
Mm,
lot of this stuff, this personal growth, meditation, just things like that. I think it is, yoga, energy work, it's all becoming a lot more mainstream. And
mm,
people are talking about things like that and are talking about purpose and happiness and
yeah,
exploring, what does make somebody happy? Because it is different for everyone. Um,
sure.
how those things, get interwoven and interlink. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but for me, certainly at the time when I found this book, I was not living in alignment, but I wouldn't have had the words for that at that
Mm.
time.
Yeah.
I didn't know what that meant. And I just knew that something didn't feel right on a
Mm.
quite a fundamental, on a kind of a deep level. I knew things didn't feel right. I knew I wanted to do something different. But like you say, I'd gone through the motions. I ticked all the boxes of like what you're supposed to do, and then was just left feeling really empty. And yeah, so I was searching. I think I've always been a searcher, but I was searching for just like, well, I mean, I remember thinking repeatedly, there's got to be something more to life than this.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
could feel that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I didn't have any influence from school, parents, or anything else kind of saying, talking about purpose or anything. It was very
Yeah.
much self journey of,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like picking up that book.
Yeah. So tell me, Hills, after you read that book
Mm.
and that passage stuck with you and you thought, oh, there is more. What did you do next?
Well, it probably was the beginning of a lot of change because trying to think of sort of the timeline. So I went traveling for the second time for a long trip towards the end of 2009. So if I read that, say, in 2006, 2007, maybe 2008, even something like that,
Yeah.
that was part of the push. I'd already gone traveling before, but I was in my 20s and it was much more about having a good time. And, whereas at this time I was sort of more like mid 30s and I was very much focused on I need to change my job because looking at, not happy with my life, I guess I didn't really know what other bits needed to change. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Like our work is obviously such a huge part that I was like, right, well, I need to change my job. This isn't aligned. So I was working in the beauty industry in marketing, and I just it wasn't for me. I didn't like it. It wasn't my thing at all. And I got into a lot of like natural, non-toxic living, so like
Yeah.
natural beauty products, because beauty products are full of toxins. So natural beauty products. I got into gardening, like growing vegetables and like food. I got really into permaculture and things like that. So I'd
Yeah.
been volunteering and this and that. And it was just like these two seemingly different worlds of like the beauty industry is like toxic, it's not authentic, da da da. And then I was kind of getting into this sort of more natural living. And so I kept sort of going like, oh, is there a way of like combining? So I did explore and I mean, at that time, there wasn't very many natural beauty brands around. So I did apply for a couple of jobs, but there wasn't much around.
Yeah.
Anyway, I did decide to go traveling again. And I went to Latin America in 2009 with a very much more purposeful intention, and that was to do some volunteering on organic farms, permaculture projects, and just culturally, just to have, I love traveling, so just to have a deeper experience. So I ended up being away for about 17 months or something, 16 months.
Wow.
That. And the last 4 months of that, I ended up living in a spiritual eco community in a tent.
Ooh.
Right, this is mad. Living in a tent in on a volcanic island in the middle of Lake Nicaragua in Central America.
Wow. Hills, I
Really
didn't know this
mad.
about you.
It was all really mad, kind of how it happened. I just knew I had to be, it was weird. I knew I had to be there. And anyway, made it all happen. And that was the most life-changing and transformational experience I've ever had because they ran different courses of tantra and permaculture. I mean, all sorts of things really. And so I learned about natural building with natural materials. I did my permaculture design course, but I also did tantra. And if for anyone listening who's done tantra, like I was thrown in at the deep end when it comes to personal growth, right? If you want,
So Hills, just for anyone who hasn't done Tantra and doesn't know what it is, what is it?
It's the most extreme personal growth you could possibly do. Don't do that as the first thing you ever do in a group, right? In a live setting. It the most confronting, the most insane thing. So people always think tantra's about sex. It isn't really about sex, but it is about intimacy. So it's about intimacy with yourself and with another, but not necessarily sexual. So there wasn't anything really sexual in the course. It was more
Yeah.
about just really being met and really being seen. And of course, when you're really seen and you're exposed, it's very, very vulnerable. And it just brought up absolutely everything.
Wow.
All stuff, all my trauma, all my everything. Thought I was having a nervous breakdown.
Oh,
Uh,
bless.
but I was in community. And again, it was the first experience I had of being held in community. So even though I was like, oh, I've got to go and make dinner because that's my chore tonight, I have to cook for 20 people or whatever it was. And people were going, no, you don't. Stay there. We'll get someone else to cover it. Like it's fun. And that for me was quite mind blowing, actually, to be like, well, I can just receive support. Like I was always the uber independent. I'll just do it all myself. Yeah, so it was just life changing in so many ways. And I got into ecstatic dance and all sorts of different things at that community. So it was just, yeah, blew me wide open. And I came back to London. So I'd been living in London, came back to London, and I was just in this very connected, sort of spiritually connected, very open, very trusting the divine kind of space. Didn't have a clue what I was going to do next.
Yeah.
Triggered everybody to all, what do you mean you don't know what you're going to do next? Like, what, I was just like, I'm just going to trust it's all going to work out. And everyone was
Yeah.
just, Hils has lost her marbles. Um, so, and then, yeah, when I came back, I was like, I knew I didn't want to be in London. I knew I didn't want to do the same work. And it took a while to transition. So I'm trying to think, I came back 2011, 2012, 20. It probably took like 3 years, 2 or 3 years of retraining. I moved to Bristol. I retrained in different modalities, and then because I did carry on doing similar work but remotely in different ways, part-time and things like that. Yeah, and then so I did start I started my own business in 2014. So yeah, within 3 years of coming back from that trip, essentially, I'd kind of did this big shift, basically
Yeah.
changed absolutely everything about my life. It's like
Yeah.
my flat, like moved city, and yeah, it was a little bit mad, but sometimes you have to sort of just jump right in. So yeah, and then I started my business, and kind of the rest is history. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so tell me, Hills, were there any other books along that journey that you picked
Oh
up
gosh.
and really sort of stuck with you?
Um, well. I don't know when much earlier than this, actually. I remember reading the Celestine Prophecy. Have you ever read that?
No.
Oh, it's
Tell me.
fiction. But it was the first time that I'd come across any kind of description of energy and auras and like how things are connected and fate and coincidence and but actually divine plan, that sort of thing, but it's
Yeah.
stories. So I think there's like 3 or 4 books, and I read them all and absolutely loved them because they're kind of an adventure story. But it was just the first time that someone had put words to some of the things that I sort of kind of instinctively knew about the world but
Yeah.
didn't. Yeah, so they were definitely quite eye-opening. But I read those
Yeah.
a few years before this because I read those, I think, around the time that I first went traveling, and that was, excuse me, 2000, 2001,
Hmm.
something like that. So, yeah, but I think, excuse me, I've got a frog. Um, I think less so books and more so when sort of in this transformational time between coming back from that traveling and starting my business and retraining and everything, I stumbled across a course with a woman who was my mentor for a while, and she's written a couple of books actually. So this course was based on her first book. So she's called Rachael Jayne Groover, and her first book is called Powerful and Feminine. And I ended up training as a teacher in her work that she shares, which is called The Art of Feminine Presence.
Mm.
Um, so again, that started as a personal growth course, and then I went to an event and then did the teacher training. So it was kind of, and then I worked with her actually as my business coach for the first year when I started my business. So she was quite influential as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good book. And I think her other book, I haven't read her second book. She's got another book that I think is called something like Unshakable Confidence or Unshakable something. She's amazing. Yeah, she's really cool. Um, yeah, and so really it was more through less so books at that point when things became more like online courses and stuff.
Yeah.
I started doing more online things and then I did all my professional training. So I trained in the art of feminine presence. I trained in something called Heart IQ, which was also a group kind of model for facilitating groups. I trained in EFT and NLP, and that's what I kind of had at the beginning of my business, basically.
Yeah. So you've got quite an extensive toolkit to draw from to help the people that
Yeah.
you work with. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And even again, more recently, I trained in some energy clearing that is specific for business owners, for online business owners, in fact. So all those blocks that specifically that we struggle with, so things like fear of judgment, struggling to share, being seen as an expert, the blocks like self-worth, self-trust, money stuff, all that kind of thing. So yeah, but I still use some of the things from those trainings that I did right at the beginning as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Oh, that's
fun.
fantastic. So when you came back to London after your mind-blowing trip, because it sounds like your mind was blown quite literally,
Really was.
what what sort of process did you go through to, I know you said that you got back to London and you thought, I don't want to be here, but what was the process you went through to get out of the kind of hamster wheel that you've been on before you went?
Yeah, so I was fortunate in that when I returned to London, a friend offered me a house sit for a month, and the company that I'd worked for before I went away, he got in touch and was like, "I hear you're back. Do you want some work for a month?" And it was like, "Yeah, okay," because I needed the money. So I worked back for a month, but I was like, "I don't want to do this anymore." And he was like,
Mm.
would you consider doing something part-time? Because I said, look, for the summer, so this was like a couple of months later, I was like, look, for the whole summer, I'm going to go woofing. So I don't know if anyone who's heard of woofing, it's Worldwide Organic Organization of Organic Farms. So I still really into the organics permaculture.
Yeah.
And I decided because I wanted to move out of London and I wanted to look at the southwest, I basically organized placements to go woofing all around the southwest across like the summer for sort of 3 or 4 months.
Oh wow. So where did you do that?
Oh, all over Devon, Dorset, yeah, sort of Devon and Dorset mostly. And yeah. So anyway, so the guy that I'd been working for a month, he was like, can you keep working? And I was like, look, I don't want to because I want to stop doing this. But this is my plan for the summer. And he was like, well, you could work remotely, you could work part-time. You could just do whatever hours you can do. I'll just pay you by the hour, just do whatever hours you can do each week, a few hours a week. And I was like, okay, because I didn't have any other income. So it was like, well, I had a flat in London that I rented, so I did have a little bit of income. Um, but the woofing obviously was like I didn't need to pay, for any accommodation apart from just moving around. So that's what I did for the first sort of few months was I just did this woofing and just met these interesting people. And again, it was like I was just following these breadcrumbs. Like I didn't know what was coming. I just followed these little breadcrumbs. And as I say, I was fortunate enough to have income from my flat and income from working a few hours a week. And then and then I lived with my parents for 6 months in the south of France.
Oh,
Um,
how awful for you.
I know. Well, you say that jokingly, but again, was quite interesting. Having
Yeah.
a lot of quite deep personal growth work. It was quite interesting to sort of be in a very close proximity with them.
Yeah.
Actually, it was in the winter, so yeah, it is beautiful down there, but it was in the winter, so one time the pipes froze and we had no water and stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, but I came back. So I think I ended up going up. to maybe 2 days a week with the company that I work for. And this is when I started to have a bit of space to start retraining and things like that. So they would fly me back to London maybe once a month for 2 or 3 days. So I got to see friends. I got to have a bit of connection still with
Yeah.
life, still
Yeah.
life. But yeah, I was working remotely way before it was fashionable, right? 10 years before. And yeah, it just I followed the breadcrumbs. So I started retraining. I really kept tuning into like, where do I want to be? And that was not an easy decision because I thought about Cornwall for a long time, but it didn't kind of land. No way I'd really massively connected with when I was woofing. And then Bristol kind of landed as an idea. I'd never been there. And I spoke to a couple of friends and friends of friends that I knew who'd lived there or lived there. And people were like, oh, it's an amazing city. You'd love it. It's great. It ticks all your boxes. So I decided to move to Bristol, having never been there, not even once. The first time I went there, I hired a car and went house hunting for somewhere to rent.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of what I did, and that was about a year after I got back from traveling. So yeah, I just moved to I just moved to Bristol.
Followed
Uh,
your instinct. Yeah.
yeah, literally. But what it's like when it did drop in, it felt very right, even though I'd never been there. So even though it looked mad from the outside, it felt I had that knowing. Do you know what I mean? I had that because I'm quite kinesthetic, so I had that kind of like, yeah, this just feels right. I'm gonna just go with it. Um, so yeah, I carried on working for the same company. I was full time for a while. I was part time for a while. So it kind of kept chopping and changing. I worked with an organic beauty brand with them for a long time, which was great. So again, it was like more aligned, even though it wasn't
Yeah.
exactly what to do. It was like just these pieces were
Yeah.
falling in place. So yeah, that's kind of it really. And then they the business that I worked for, I was kind of becoming ready to leave, and they were doing a big restructure because they let go of their biggest client. So actually, I just said to my boss, I was like, "Look, don't include me in the restructure. I'm planning to leave anyway in the next couple of months. So just phase me out kind of thing." So yeah, so I ended up leaving and mostly starting women's work was the main thing that I did at the beginning, using the art of feminine presence. So I'd held a couple of group things before I left the work, but really I just ended up jumping. I had no income and
Yeah.
I just jumped in with 2 feet. I'd sold my flat in London, so I had a bit of money to live on for a while, and I just jumped. I just jumped in and went.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't really do things by halves, I think. So,
So, Hills, what would your advice be to anyone who is sat there thinking, yeah, my life isn't really what I want it to be. I'm stuck in this job or career that I never wanted to. What would be your advice to helping them take the next step so that they can get out of that situation?
yeah, I would say find someone to help you with it, a coach or mentor or something. Maybe, be a bit specific about what help you need. Um, but yeah, just find a kind of a life coach, for want of a better word, of someone that helps people with figuring out what they want to do or what needs to change or whatever. And do that in a work that is just so necessary and so important because if you don't know what your truth is, if you don't know yourself, then you can't shift the external to bring it into alignment with you.
Yeah.
So a
So
lot of
get a coach first before you nip off to Nicaragua and go on a
probably
course.
probably. But I mean, it's like if you've got an idea,
Yeah.
kind of just go with it because I wasn't sure about going to to Latin America, and I was having a conversation with a friend um about about 10 months before I went, and I was just going, oh, I've been looking at these like voluntary holidays. You can go on holiday, volunteer
Yeah.
for weeks. And I was like, but I'd just come back and nothing would have changed. And she
Yeah.
just felt like I was mad, like I couldn't see the answer because it was right in front of me. And she just went, why don't you just go for longer? And I was like, oh, that's a good idea. Right. So it like took me 10 months to like save money, figure it out,
Yeah.
and I went. And it's like you just never know what the answer is because it's going to be different for everyone. But I think definitely follow the breadcrumbs. Don't worry about having to know what that whole path looks like because
Yeah.
you just cannot know.
Yeah.
You cannot know. So follow what feels right now. Like follow the next step. And yeah, just do whatever you can to figure out what that is and whether that's you just need a hobby that fulfills you, but actually your job is okay. Whether it do you need a different job? Do you need to, shake up more different things? Because there's so many parts to our lives that could be bringing the dissatisfaction, but
Yes, so true. Yeah, yeah.
it might be your relationship, your work, your relationship with yourself. It could be anything. So I think, yeah, read some self-help books if that's the first step, but just there's so much out there online, courses and things like that. But just yeah, get to know yourself and start
Mm,
following those breadcrumbs. Yeah.
awesome. Wise words indeed, Hills. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. It's been a real eye-opener for me because, we've known each other for a few years. I didn't know any of this stuff about Nicaragua and all the rest of it. So, yeah, I look forward to chatting more about that.
Oh,
So
thank you
thank
so
you
much.
so much for coming on. And thanks everyone for watching, listening in. Please do remember to like and subscribe and share the link with your friends if this has touched you in any way. And I will see you in the next episode. Take care. Bye.